You guys got to authorize it. Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so should be going, yeah. All right, so welcome to
All right.
Yeah, we're good to go, yeah. All right, welcome to the Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast, and today I have two guests on. So Edward was previously on an episode, probably like 10 episodes ago, where we talked about life in India and some traditions in India. And we also brought on a friend of his, Kess, who I believe was a mentor to your father. Is that correct?
Oh no, yeah, Kess is here now.
Yeah.
But last time Koal was on. No, that was Esoteric Nerd. I don't. Yeah, but this is Kess's first time on here.
Okay, cool, yeah. So maybe since the listeners might be familiar with Edward, maybe Kess, can you give us an introduction and a little bit about your background and practice?
Sure, I can do that. I became interested in the spiritual journey in my very early 20s. I was a psychology student. This was like in the early 1960s. And I had the opportunity to try this experimental drug from Switzerland, LSD 25, which at the time was unknown. It had not received any publicity. It was not even illegal. I had an artist friend who had been involved in the Los Angeles area in some experiments they were doing with artists to see how this chemical would affect their creativity and how the visual phenomena and so forth would influence them. So my friend, he told me I could learn more about what was in my mind by trying this than from all the books I was reading and lectures I was going to and everything else. And so it really piqued my interest. And right around the same time, I read this book by Aldous Huxley called Island, which is the last novel he wrote. It was his idea of a utopia. And I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but it's been considered one of the greatest novels of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And the island has a way of life that is based on the technology of Western science and the mysticism of Eastern spirituality and the yogas and so forth. And there's a psychedelic mushroom indigenous to the island, which they call the moksha medicine. And as you probably know, the word moksha in Sanskrit means liberation. So you experience the thing through the eyes of this rather cynical reporter who's actually been hired by Western corporate interests to accidentally get himself, accidentally on purpose, get himself shipwrecked on the island because they don't allow people to come there because they don't want the outer world intruding on the good thing that they're going. So you experience the whole thing through his eyes. And basically the effect that had on me was I realized there was this whole thing called Eastern philosophy that I knew absolutely nothing about. So I decided that before I could go any further in my search for truth and my path, I needed to learn about this.
Okay.
So that combined with the LSD experience got me started.
Interesting.
And, in fact, I just completed rewriting a memoir, which Edward read the earlier version of it. Was written when I was 42 years old, 25 years ago. No, 35 years ago. I'm 70, just about to turn 78, actually.
Wow.
So,
happy birthday, by the way. That's in a few hours for you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, happy birthday. Happy birthday.
So in your time zone, you're probably already is my birthday.
Yeah.
We're celebrating in the future. Nice.
So I had an uncle who was a psychologist who was a mentor to me, and he's the one that got me interested in philosophy and psychology after I had rejected my religious upbringing, from my family in the Catholic Church, which this was pre-Vatican II. It was very narrow-minded, to say the least. And I figured he was probably the only person I could talk to who would begin to understand what I'd experienced, because I had a spiritual awakening on my first trip, and unknowingly I took an overdose because my friend, he told me a lot of good things. He said, don't plan to go anywhere for a couple of days, don't go out in public, stay indoors, do not fight it, and remember, no matter what happens, you will come back down. In other words, don't freak out, no matter what you might think the future holds, because you will come back down. Those are all excellent guidelines.
Yeah.
But what he neglected to tell me was how potent this stuff was. It was pure pharmaceutical LSD 25 from the laboratory. It was discovered in Switzerland. And it was a vial, a glass vial about, 2 or 3 inches high, but it was wrapped up in tinfoil. And he said, you got to keep it in the tinfoil until you use it, because if the light hits it, it'll start to break it down and it'll lose its potency. So I hadn't seen inside the vial. So I kept it in a refrigerator. And I had a girlfriend I was living with at the time. And when we opened the vial, there was only like about maybe a quarter of an inch in there. And I thought, oh, shit, we've been ripped off here, I was expecting the vial to be full. We were planning to split it. So we thought nothing's going to happen. A lot happened. It was a big surprise.
Did you have any idea about how much you were taking? Because it was, it was liquid. Did you just drop some on food or on your tongue, or did you just have no idea how much it was at the time?
Drink it?
Yeah, drinking.
I think we mixed it in a little water,
right.
And tried to estimate what was half a vial, and then we each drank it, and we thought nothing was going to happen. So,
that was probably a lot of doses.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a drop is very small if you've never used an eyedropper.
Right. Right.
So we probably took, I don't know, maybe 6,000 micrograms each or something like that.
Wow.
All you needed was one drop would be enough for a powerful trip, and 2 drops was super powerful.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah.
But it was literally a life-changing experience.
Okay, interesting.
And so I shared with my uncle about it, and he showed me this publication he had that was being privately circulated among professionals. It's called Explorations. It was out of Berkeley, and the particular current issue, the topic was LSD 25. So he gave it to me, and it had articles on very effective research that was being done with heroin addicts, getting off of heroin, alcoholics, psychotic people that were depressed, and other situations. The creativity of artist study that my friend was in there. And there was one interview with this man named John Aiken, who had started in 1963 an organization called the Church of the Awakening, which wanted to get permission under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to use psychedelics as a sacrament. In fact, I recently came in touch with he had a book called Explorations in Awareness that he wrote, that introduces the person. This guy was a retired medical doctor. He was, he was a straight, very straight person. So was his wife. They had lost their two sons. One was a test pilot for the Navy, and the other was killed in a sailing accident in the early 50s, and it really devastated them. So they became spiritual seekers. They were living in Socorro, New Mexico, and they got connected with a Native American church and got started with peyote. But anyway, this is, I don't know if this is going to be seeable for you or not, but this is the cover
Oh yeah.
of this book. It was republished in an enlarged edition. So it's got his original book in it, plus it's got some other articles that he wrote, and a real nice summary of the whole psychedelic movement in the 60s by the editor. Yeah, I just recently received it. But it gives spiritual practices to do when tripping, which is a real practical thing, and advises the type of environment and how to prepare for it and so forth. So it's a really good thing. At the time, though, my uncle told me about another book that was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead called The Psychedelic Experience. It was done by the Harvard professors who'd been booted out of Harvard, giving out to undergraduates. That was Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, and Ralph Metzner. So I was very interested in wanting to get a hold of that. I went to a store called Romans in Pasadena, which you're probably familiar with, Edward. Romans on Colorado Boulevard there. And anyway, I asked for it, and the guy said they didn't have any in stock, but they had it on order. And I went looking around, and I found a translation by W.Y. Evans Vance, the Harvard scholar, of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I purchased. And that book was way the hell over my head. It had a really good forward by Carl Jung and also by Lama Govinda, who was German.
Oh, that's the version I have right here for the viewers.
Oh
yeah. Yeah, it's still in. It was originally published in 1922 by the Oxford University Press. It's a wonderful book, and I was impressed with Lama Govinda, and he became one of my teachers because I had the opportunity to catch up with him and learn a puja ritual, which I still do, that he created that's dedicated to Arya Maitreya, who's considered the coming Buddha, who's going to bring the teachings of love to humanity. He's going to be born in the West. And I have a suspicion, and this might be a controversial opinion, but I think that Jesus Christ may well have been Maitreya Buddha. Because he was born in the West, and one of the things the Buddha said was coming in 500 years, but another zero has been added to that by most Buddhists. But Jesus came around 500 years after Shakyamuni Buddha's lifetime. And his real teachings were about love.
Right.
The fundamental teaching that God is love is one of the greatest, simplest, and most profound clues that we have to the spiritual journey and to reality. And then the other important thing that's in the first letter of John, in the back of the Bible, but in the front, in the beginning of Genesis, it says that we are created in God's image and likeness. And those two are like bookends for me. everything in nature creates after its own likeness,
Mm.
whether you're talking about a plant, animal, or human being. So the statement that we are created in God's image and likeness means that we are many gods.
Mhm.
And of course, how can God have an image? Because God is not a created reality. I think that God's image is his creation. And one of the greatest models for that is the Kabbalistic tree of life,
Mm.
which is a map of consciousness, a map of creation, and for the microcosm, it's a map of the soul.
Mhm.
You could also call it a tree of mandalas.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
I'm curious, when you were experimenting with LSD, uh, how long did it take you from those experimentation period into, delving into things like studying the Tibetan Book of the Dead and other serious spiritual practice? Was it pretty immediate, or did you
It was immediate.
experiment? Yeah.
I started studying the Tibetan Book of the Dead before I did anything else.
Mm.
Once I found out about it, right after my first session, and
Mm-hmm.
he also gave me a book called Zen Buddhism and Psychoanalysis,
Mm.
which is by Eric Fromm, Richard DiMartino, and D.T. Suzuki, who was
Mm-hmm.
a Japanese Zen master who worked with Eric Fromm in a university, I think in Mexico City or somewhere in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the Aikens, they became mentors for me. They had started their spiritual search, oh, a good 10, 12 years, before I met them. And they were saying that the psychedelic is an adjunct to help you along, but you need to do spiritual practices of meditation on a daily basis and to take the sacrament maybe once a year, which is what they did in the island, or at the very
Mm.
most 4 times a year, not to rely upon it,
Mm.
but uh, to keep it very sacred and only do it on rare occasions
Mm-hmm.
because you want to get to where you can access that dimension without needing chemical assistance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the spiritual practices are totally essential.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I knew people who went the other way and they ended up with very sad results.
Mm.
There was a friend of Edward's dad and mine named Jim Gordon, and
Mm-hmm.
he got mixed up with this acid king at Pasadena City College,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy encouraged him to take it every other day. And he had already started studying with uh, John Dan Reeb and doing Kabbalistic meditation and using some of the tarot cards. And he had opened up a door in his mind he couldn't close. And
Mm.
taking LSD every other day was a big mistake. He became very arrogant. He was convinced, like this other guy was, that he was enlightened, didn't need to meditate, and had a very superior kind of attitude. And I was living down in Santa Ana going to UC Irvine
Mm-hmm.
when he met John Dan. He's the person that introduced me. John Dan was his English teacher at PCC.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the one that introduced me to John Dan.
Mm.
And I met him the year before in a chemistry class.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a really good guy, very bright, had great potential,
Mm.
very talented. But he ended up spending the latter years of his life in a mental institution in San Diego.
Yeah.
Mm.
So too
I
much
remember a
acid.
story. I remember a story about my mom and my dad going to visit him in the mental institution, and I think it was a crow or some kind of bird just dive bombed the windshield of the car as they were driving once they were on the property, and they took that as a bad sign. Maybe it was a coincidence, but
Oh man, that's too bad. So did you
some
have a
weird
lot of
psychic
friends?
energy.
You have a lot of friends that ended up, burnt out on LSD, or was it only one or two casualties?
There was only a couple of casualties.
Mhm.
Most of the people that I knew didn't go off the deep end.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And this is
And
way before LSD was illegal too, as you mentioned. So people were just—it's kind of like the Wild West, right? Of
well, I
experimentation.
first took it. I first took it in June of 1965,
Wow. Wow.
and it became illegal in around September of '66.
Hmm. Oh,
And
so about a year before, yeah. Hmm.
so it was a little over a year before it wasn't even in the, nobody knew who it was.
Hmm.
Nobody knew what it was at the time when I took it.
Right.
It was just an experimental drug. And of course, there was knowing that these guys at Harvard
Hmm.
had gotten into trouble and they'd gone down to Mexico and
Hmm.
they were experimenting with psilocybin mushrooms,
Mm.
which are not quite as powerful. But then when the stuff was on the black market, you didn't know what the hell you were getting
Yeah.
because a lot of it was cut with amphetamine and
Right.
other things.
Right.
In fact, I had a very bad trip. The third time I took it, and I think it was cut with amphetamines,
Hmm.
but that's not why I had the bad trip.
Mm.
It was my own immature attitude. I set myself up for
Mm.
Mm.
it. That trip, and I got the feeling that like when you take that,
Hmm.
you're speeding up your karma,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know. And I experienced what the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the psychedelic experience called judgment visions.
Mm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I was in a really broken down state. I write about all this in my memoir.
Hmm. Is your memoir released, or have you not released that yet?
I'm looking for a publisher now.
Hmm.
I just completed it. I'm having a few copies made so I can send them out, you know.
Hmm.
And there's an editor that I know who knows publishers, and she's going to put in a word for me with a couple of them.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd
But
definitely be interested to read that. Yeah, definitely.
this is a timely this is a timely time for it because since 2004 there's been some serious legal research being done
Hmm.
with people with PTSD
Yeah.
and other things, mostly using psilocybin. But
Hmm.
have you heard the book How to Change Your Mind?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a book about this. And
Mm.
so it's a very good book. Right in the beginning of my memoir, I reference that because I know there was such a lot of misinformation and
Hmm.
negative publicity. So there's a lot of negative cultural conditioning in the collective
Hmm.
consciousness of people in the United States and elsewhere
Hmm.
that just think that psychedelics are a dangerous, evil thing. And
Right.
they don't
Right.
realize that it is dangerous, yes,
Hmm.
but it also has a great potential for good if it's used when someone doesn't have a latent psychosis and
Hmm.
with the right preparation and under the right environment and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
It could,
unfortunate the door got shut on all of that potentially beneficial research, and it just recently got reopened. With all of the studies related to PTSD, as you mentioned, and
yes,
there's just so much data now available, just showing the massive impact it has on, like veterans coming back from war and people with different disorders, right? So,
yes.
but they got paused for like 60 years, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, it was an overreaction,
Mhm.
by our government,
Mhm.
uh, extreme, and yeah, it was a shame.
Yeah, definitely,
It,
definitely.
it was a big, it was a big shame. The panic
Wasn't
was like,
conspiracy to overthrow the government one of the charges for dealing LSD?
oh yeah, it
There,
was a
there
Russian
was just
plot.
this correlation. If you take LSD, then you're going to want to overthrow the government, and they were kind of right.
I mean, in
Just,
some
but that was
ways,
more said
yeah.
more about the government than it did about the acid.
Right.
No, well, people who had spiritual experiences,
Hmm.
Hmm.
many of them became nonviolent
Mm.
and compassionate people and
Hmm.
realized the oneness of us all.
Right, right,
That
right.
was what hit me on my first experience.
It wasn't very good for the military-industrial complex.
No,
Yeah.
but one of the rumors was that it was a secret communist plot to undermine our youth.
Mm,
Hmm.
interesting. Interesting. Very interesting.
So there
So,
was all kinds of hysteria.
yeah, yeah, it's very unfortunate.
I
So you
would
end up,
compare it to, I'd compare it to the hysteria around the COVID epidemic,
yeah,
pandemic, starting in about March of 2020.
right, right, right. So you see a lot of parallels with that time and then this recent, you know, like you said,
Well,
hysteria over COVID. Yeah.
in terms of mm, uh, brainwashing masses of people and scaring the shit out of them and
Right,
closing their minds, I
right.
see a lot of parallels. But
Yeah, interesting.
otherwise,
Uh,
in terms of raising consciousness and awakening spirituality,
mhm.
I don't see anything in COVID that does that. But, but when a person has a life crisis,
Mhm.
sometimes that does produce a spiritual awakening because you're dealing with basic existential issues of life and death.
Right,
And
right.
maybe you
Yeah,
decide what's really important. What do I
right,
really care about?
right. Exactly, exactly. I heard there was a huge uptick during COVID in like people researching or joining like Buddhist sanghas, like cyber online Vajrayana groups, and also in looking into magic and mysticism and joining sort of online programs and things like that. Because at the time, that's all you have, right? Like Zoom, and so you could join these teachings, and people were sort of looking deeper as they were sort of put into this isolation and sort of bombarded with fear messages, propaganda, right? So it did have some for some people. It definitely had that impact. For
Yeah, it was
others,
in a
maybe
way
the opposite.
it was like an opportunity to do a solitary retreat
Yeah,
if you used it that way and didn't
yeah,
allow yourself to be over influenced by all the hysteria.
absolutely, absolutely. And the thing was like a 3 year. I mean, it's lasted about what 2.5 years, 2.5 years or so of all
It'll
the.
be 3 years in March.
Yeah, exactly. That could be your 3 year retreat. Like you said, like they do in Vajrayana. Yeah. So you ended up researching the Tibetan Book of the Dead and finding a teacher that way. I'm curious, like how all of this developed too. Like from that point, you started sitting with that teacher, and then you started looking into other traditions. Maybe you can kind of share a little bit about your journey after that.
Okay, well, uh, this this woman I was involved with that I took the first LSD trip with, she was going to San Francisco State College,
Hmm.
and I'm skipping a bunch of stuff, but I went up to join her after doing a solitary camping trip
Hmm.
near San Luis Obispo for a couple months and doing a couple psychedelic trips, on one of which I experienced the vision of the ending of my last incarnation. And she knew about Lama Govinda. We had purchased already a copy of his classic book, The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism,
Hmm.
which came out in mid 1950. But really, at that time, was nothing hardly at all
This book
available
right
in English.
Hmm. Foundations of
Yeah,
Tibetan. Yeah.
mysticism, and that outlines the Vajrayana path and the Bodhisattva ideal very well, and compares it with Hindu yoga.
Hmm.
Uh, it's a great book.
Hmm.
He was a great scholar. He was fluent in 7 languages.
Oh wow.
Govinda was. He was originally from Germany.
Hmm.
But anyway, he was giving a public lecture in San Francisco And my friend went to it, and they announced there that he had one of his disciples lived in San Francisco, was going to offer training if people wanted to learn about the puja. And so they had a monthly, study group. So once I started living in San Francisco, we went to the monthly study group. We had to study for 3 years in Buddhism before we could begin learning the puja.
Okay.
So we had to learn the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana.
Oh, wow.
Govinda integrated them all.
Yeah, that's good.
He was a big believer in integrating them all. And right around the same time, right after actually it took me about a year to learn the puja. Right towards the end of that, the Church of the Awakening had gone through its whole process, and they had, the Ninth District Federal Court in San Francisco was one of the more liberal ones. So they chose to have the hearing there. And I was living there, so I got to go to the hearings. There was no publicity. There was hardly anybody there in the hearing. There was the lawyers from the FDA and the government who were opposed to what the church wanted. And there was the people from the Church of the Awakening and the church's attorney, who was a member of the church, who was a very competent Chicago attorney. And these people had, the Aikens had connections with people all over the country in the professional world of psychiatry, psychology, medicine, chiropractic, and so forth. So most of the members were professional, upper middle class, well-educated people who were, they weren't flaky people.
Yeah.
You couldn't call them hippies or, anything like that. And some of their children, of course, were members of the church too. So the case that we had was really good. And the government even said, our lawyers said, we don't really question the legitimacy of your church and what you're trying to do and how you want to do it. But if we allow you to get permission, this is going to open the door for all these other flaky groups. And we just can't have that. And so the judge, he refused to rule on the case. So the only other recourse we had to do was to go to the Supreme Court in D.C. And so we tried to go to the Supreme Court. And at that time, so like the early 70s, if you wanted to bring a case before the Supreme Court, you had to pay $6,000 and do all this paperwork. And so we did that. And what they did was they refused to put it on their docket. They simply refused to do the case.
That's terrible.
Because they knew under the Constitution we had every right to what we were asking for. And we would win the case. But that's how extreme the government's reaction was to suppressing psychedelics.
Right.
So, I mean, what we could have done was keep giving them $6,000 and they could just keep refusing to hear it. So we just figured, flush that. And the last thing the Aikens did was they disbanded the church because it had gone the whole course of what it was set up for and couldn't go any further. They said that there was a spiritual teacher from India that they had met in 1960 who was the most inspiring spiritual teacher they'd ever had contact with. He was from southern India, a town at the time called Pune. And he was from an upper class family, a well-to-do family. He'd been educated in British schools, so he was fluent in English. And he had done a cross-country bus trip in the United States, and they were living in Socorro, New Mexico. And Louisa, John's wife, she didn't normally look at the newspaper, but something compelled her to do it on that day. And she saw his picture in the Albuquerque newspaper, and she just got this feeling, I've got to meet this guy. And so they went to Albuquerque, and they found him. And they invited him to come to their place in Socorro, and they asked him if he would be willing to try LSD, because they told him, all about what they were doing.
Yeah.
What they had done in the Spiritually Awakened. They said, we'd like to see how a holy man,
Yeah.
a spiritually awakened man, because this guy's presence was extremely impressive. We'd like to see what you would think of it. And he agreed to do it. And what he said was that this guy had spent 12 years in meditating in caves in the Himalayas and studied under a number of gurus. He said he went through in 12 hours on LSD the same thing he'd gone through in 12 years in the Himalayan cave.
Interesting.
And so his advice was this could be very helpful for people, but only if used judiciously once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
But not to be used as something you do every week or every month or whatever.
Yeah.
Because you get addicted to it or psychologically dependent on it.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
he gave it the stamp of approval. Most other gurus that they approached were not open to even trying it. Lama Govinda tried it. Timothy Leary presented it to him, and he had a very good experience with the Amitabha Buddha, the Buddha of his life, which was one of his main sadhanas.
What's fascinating is when they give psychedelic compounds to people of different religious traditions, they all have visions of that specific cosmology, right? Like when they give it to like the Catholic priest or the Buddhist monks, they all have their own very similar experiences, but seeing different visions compared to or related to what their cosmological views are.
Exactly. They experience through the symbolism of their tradition and their culture and their belief system.
Yeah.
And all of those things are simply doorways into what goes beyond images and words.
Yeah.
Beyond name and form, nama rupa, as they say in Sanskrit, beyond name and form. Because the reality ultimately, it doesn't belong to any tradition. The traditions are vehicles created by humans to assist us in approaching what goes beyond name and form.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that was how my experience was the first time, the reality I was experiencing, it wasn't labeled with any tradition. It was just this invisible energy and presence, this intuitive knowing, and this incredible sharing and this incredible consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
The sacred presence of sacred consciousness that everything I knew, everything was part of it. Then when I was coming down, I could see how the symbolism of the Mass actually contains the message, the idea of communion and union, but it had been completely misunderstood and misexplained to people within the church, the Catholic Church. But the idea that we are the body of Christ in a more literal, spiritual sense.
So in your journey, then you really ended up studying with like a lot of different teachers and a lot of different traditions, right? Ultimately.
Yeah, well, this teacher from India, the Aikens, they said that he's agreed to come back to the country, and if we will raise the money to pay for his transportation, and if you'd like him to, he'll come and stay in your home.
Like a homestay, homestay program with a guru.
I sent him $25, and the guy came and stayed with me when I was living in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
I set up some speaking engagements for him at the
That's cool.
Metaphysical Center and got involved with him.
What was the name of this Indian guru? Was he well
His
known
name
or?
was Swami Amar Jyoti.
Okay, so Amar Jyoti. Okay.
I have a cassette of him talking from my parents.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, John Dan Reeb eventually got to meet him.
Okay.
He went and had dinner at my uncle, the psychologist's house,
Mhm.
and John Dan took him there
Mm.
and met him. And then he wrote a book called Spirit of Amalia.
Mm.
Oh yeah, my dad reviewed it in Yoga
Yeah.
Magazine. Yeah.
He asked John Dan to write a review for the Yoga Journal, and he did to help give it some publicity.
Mm. Nice, nice, nice.
There's a lot of connections in this, but I became his follower, and it was fine with him if I continued doing the puja and all that, because he taught a universal spirituality.
Mm.
Well, he himself came from a Hindu cultural background. He
Right.
was saying you can reach enlightenment through any religion or no religion. It doesn't matter.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good.
He was extraordinary,
Mm.
and he started an ashram above Boulder, Colorado,
Mhm.
called Sacred Mountain Ashram. I lived there for a couple of years as a guest ashram boy.
Mm.
So that was more a part of my journey.
Mm. Well, how long did you say you stayed at that ashram?
A couple of years.
Okay. It was located where, you said?
Boulder, Colorado. It
Yeah.
was located on the mountain near Gold Hill above Boulder, about 8,000 feet.
Okay. Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, it
And
seemed like.
John Dan also visited there. John Dan Reeb also visited there.
Okay. Yeah, it seemed like that area at the time really started blowing up. I think didn't like Ram Dass and Chogyam Trungpa also have.
Yeah, Chogyam Trungpa started the
Mm.
Naropa Institute there,
Right.
and Ram Dass came and taught there.
Right. Right. Right.
Several other people.
Did you ever attend those any teachings there or visit the Naropa Institute?
Yeah, I did. I knew a couple of people that were full-time students there,
Mhm.
and I became a student also at Chogyam Trungpa when I was living in San Francisco.
Mm.
That was before I met Swami Amar Jyoti.
Now, I just for the record, where was it that you met Chogyam Trungpa?
Where did I meet him?
Yeah, it was on a houseboat, wasn't it?
Party?
No, that was where I met Lama Govinda. That was
Okay.
on Alan Watts' houseboat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Different.
I just
era.
thought that was so cool. He just casually mentioned, "Oh yeah, that was on Alan Watts' houseboat." I'm like,
Different group.
what?
So Trungpa you met like at a seminar or?
Okay, yeah.
He was giving a public. He was giving a public talk at a Protestant church in Berkeley.
Okay.
And I had already discovered his wonderful book called Meditation in Action.
Oh
That
yeah.
was the first book Shambhala published by him.
Right.
It's a real classic. And
he has some great books for sure. Yeah.
oh yeah, he was very extraordinary and very unconventional. I went to see him, and he was sitting up in front of the people. He had a 6-pack of beer, and he was opening and drinking beer, and he was chain smoking Marlboro cigarettes.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. What was your take on him? Because he is sort of a controversial figure, right? Like he has so many profound teachings, and often people categorize him as like crazy wisdom kind of approach, right? So some
He
people
taught
say,
called crazy wisdom. That's a term he came up with.
Right. What was your take on him personally?
I think he was a legitimate teacher. He was also a wild man. Part of his idea was if you're going to teach Americans, you got to become super American. So he smoked and drank to let people know you can do that stuff and still
Mm-hmm.
be on the spiritual path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But at that first teaching, there were several people that were outraged at his behavior, and they got up and walked out
Right, right, right.
because he wasn't pure enough for them.
Right, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Uh, well, people
And
have their
then,
concepts of what spirituality is, and also a lot of spiritual traditions come with cultural baggage, right? That it's not relatable even to Western audiences, right?
absolutely,
So, yeah.
I would include Tibetan Buddhism in that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. A lot of ritual and a lot of just cultural milieu that isn't really even pertinent to the practice itself, right?
But
The
a
path.
lot of the followers,
Mhm.
they can't separate the baggage from the real spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. They get more
Unfortunately,
more obsessed or more focused on the cultural baggage rather than the actual substance and the
I
path, the
think the
ground.
cultural baggage, that without the cultural baggage, you're not going to make it.
Mm, okay.
You know, you won't. God will reject you, or you won't be enlightened. You know,
Right.
and
It's
it's
like I got
really
to
a big
learn
question.
Tibetan or Hebrew or Sanskrit or I'm not legit, you know, or whatever, you know. Yeah.
There's a lot of baggage, and
Yeah.
well, Trungpa was a person that really broke all the molds of following stuff. You know,
Yeah.
and so in a way, he made a contribution.
Hmm.
But I went to a couple of weekend long seminars he gave and had private interviews with him,
Mm.
just me and him.
Wow.
And
Wow.
he was very clear,
Hmm.
and he read me. And he could read me, and he knew just where I was at.
Interesting. Interesting. What were some like major takeaways you had with from spending time with him for you personally?
Well, he told me that I was going to be meeting my spiritual teacher.
Hmm.
I hadn't met him yet, and that's referring to the Swamiji.
Okay.
Mm.
So he told me to, to do basic mindfulness meditation
Hmm.
and to read a book called The Heart of Buddhist Meditation by Nyana Ponika Thera, which is a classic in the Theravadan tradition.
Hmm.
And he said that when you meet your spiritual teacher, he'll tell you what to do from there.
Okay. So it kind of gave you a little preview of what was to come on your journey, so to speak,
Yeah.
and
And
some
well,
practical advice.
he knew that he wasn't my main teacher, and he
Mm.
was letting me know that also.
Yeah.
But I mean, I really liked him. Lama Govinda did not approve of what he was doing.
Ah, that's interesting. Okay. It's interesting that he pointed you to like, you're going to meet this other teacher and so on and so forth. But then
Yeah,
your teacher didn't approve of him who pointed you that way.
no, no,
Uh,
no. Lama Govinda didn't approve of him, but Trungpa wasn't talking about Lama Govinda.
oh, he's
He was
talking about
talking
Swami. That's right. Okay.
about Swami Amar Jyoti, who I had not yet met. I
Right.
had already met Lama Govinda
Right.
and been studying, when I met Trungpa.
Hmm.
So I was sort of trying to follow both of them at the same time.
Hmm.
But my puja teacher, who was an American, he told me that Lama Govinda didn't approve of what Trungpa was doing and
Hmm.
thought it was regrettable that he had allowed himself to fall into the condition he was in because he was an alcoholic.
Okay. Yeah.
And in one of the tricycle magazines, I got a good insight by a guy who used to be Trungpa's houseboy.
Hmm.
He used to help him get dressed because, Trungpa was paralyzed on one side because when he was in England, he was driving drunk. He crashed into the joke shop,
Hmm.
and got paralyzed on one side.
Yeah. I remember hearing that story. Yeah.
And anyway, this guy who was his houseboy, was observing his drunkenness, and in his mind was questioning whether or not he should still follow him,
Mm.
And when Trungpa, who was drunk, all of a sudden became totally sober, looked him in the eye and said, "You need to learn to separate the teacher from the man."
Very interesting. That's an interesting quote because I feel like in this day and age, people cannot do that, right? Like, for example, with like the whole cancel culture and something. For example, say you're an artist and you did something regrettable 30 years ago, then they want to cancel you off the face of the earth, and it's like you can't separate the art from an action somebody did, or maybe their personality now, or even their personality 30 years ago. They're not even the same person anymore.
You really see that in politics.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was a controversy of whether Bill Clinton had ever smoked marijuana when he was in college. As if he had, that would disqualify him for
Right.
running for president. And of course, Clinton said, "Well, I did, but I didn't inhale," which is a typical Clinton
Right.
comeback.
Oh, that's funny.
If
That's
you didn't
hilarious.
inhale, why even do it?
Yeah.
That is pretty funny. Oh, it is. Anyways, so you ended up studying with the Swamiji for a few years, you mentioned, right? And then,
Yeah.
uh and then from there, did you continue sort of the same practices, or did you decide to explore some other traditions or teachers?
Uh, yeah. Well, when I left the ashram, I had gotten this kind of restless feeling. One thing was that most of the people, not me, most of the people, they worshipped him like he was God.
Oh, okay, okay. The Swamiji, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
And, when I first met him, when he was at my place, I invited a few people over. We had a frank discussion. And he said there's different ways that the guru can relate to the disciple depending on what the disciple's temperament and needs are.
Okay.
And he said it can be as master to disciple,
Mm-hmm.
devotee to Lord,
Mm-hmm.
teacher to student, friend to friend, lover to beloved,
Mm-hmm.
uh, child to parent. I think it was one of them. In other words, like the guru, a really fully developed guru, such as himself,
Mm-hmm.
could relate to you in whatever way you needed it.
Right, right.
And my relationship with him was friend to friend and student to teacher and disciple to master.
Okay, okay.
And most of the people following him, particularly the ones at the ashram, they were they regarded him as God incarnate.
Mm-hmm.
And they resented the fact that I didn't have the same approach to him that they did.
Oh, they were resentful about that?
I didn't think I was devoted enough.
Ah, interesting. Okay, interesting. Okay. But they didn't see that you had a different relationship, a different.
Not very well.
Yeah.
Not very well.
So do you think that sort of become like a cult of personality or something like that?
Well, it's easier for something to evolve into.
Yeah.
And I think over the years, I think something happened to Swamiji. We had all these people worshiping him, and there was nobody that he was accountable to.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And he used to confide things in me that he didn't tell other people, just
Right.
because I had a different relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, eventually, anyway, I think he wanted me to become more devoted, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I was politely asked to leave the ashram,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
and I was before that happened though. I already decided I think I need to leave here.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, if you're asked to leave, you can still come back. But if you leave without being asked, then you may become persona non grata.
Okay.
So after I left, I continued to go up to see him and have satsangs and have interviews with him and stuff.
Okay. Okay.
The first book I published was a book of his teaching called Satsang Notes of Swami Amar Jyoti. That was published in 1976.
Okay.
Based on the teachings at the first week-long annual retreat they had at Sacred Mountain Ashram.
Okay. Okay. So you still continue a relationship with him despite leaving the ashram?
That's right.
Okay. Good. Good. Good.
I was still welcome. I wrote letters. He wrote back, and when he gave retreats, a couple of times I went and I attended them, and had private meetings with him a couple of times. And he, before I left the ashram, he said that he knew I was going to be needing to leave there because I had a mission. And he said he wanted to work on me for a couple more years before I left to prepare me for the mission.
Okay. So you ended up publishing some teachings of his and
Well, we published that book before I went to the ashram.
Oh, okay.
And then he asked me to start a journal. And so I started a journal called Truth Consciousness Journal. And then the name got changed. And once I started becoming a guest ashramite, I got less involved with the journal because I was spending multiple hours meditating every day and doing my puja. And I wasn't associating with the other ashramites. Most of the male ashramites did manual labor, and I wasn't doing that. And I think some of them resented the fact that I wasn't doing any manual labor.
They didn't feel like you're earning your keep there, huh?
Well, no, at one point I did start doing it.
Okay. Interesting.
It was an interesting experience. But I haven't written about that yet.
Okay. Interesting.
My next volume is probably going to cover some of those years, yeah.
Okay. So after that, did you become more of a solo practitioner, or did you seek out other teachers or groups or things along those lines?
Well, I had a lot to work with.
Yeah.
I was living down in Boulder for a couple of years, and I did go to the Naropa Institute, and I went to some talks there. Joan Halifax gave a talk there. Do you know who she is?
Sounds very familiar.
Well, she was married to Stan Grof, who was a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist that did some breakthrough research with psychedelics.
Okay.
First in Czechoslovakia, and then he came to the United States. That's where he met her. And they had separated. And I think she's a Zen teacher now.
Okay.
But she was an incredible lady. And I met a woman I got involved with who was a student at Colorado University in Boulder, and she went up to Anchorage, Alaska to do an internship, and then with Ralph Nader organization.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Alaska Public Interest Research Group. They have them all over different states. But they do research on different things, and then they advise the public on where they can get the best deal.
Okay. How about during this time? We're talking a lot about these spiritual practices. Were you very involved politically during this time as well? Or did you see any sort of intersection with your new, with your practice and worldview and changing perceptions and paradigms too?
I was real involved politically before I took LSD.
Oh, interesting.
I was involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Nice. Excellent.
I was even in a march in Los Angeles where it was a legal march. It was a peace march.
Mhm.
and the LA Tag Squad attacked the marchers with
Mm.
clubs and tear gas.
Oh, wow. Terrible.
I've written about that in the new version of the memoir.
Okay.
But that March, that time I decided I'm not going to do this anymore.
Mm.
Because if you do this, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to harm yourself to protect yourself.
Mhm.
And if you start doing that, you're playing right into their hands. So screw it.
Mm.
No, this isn't my path.
Right. Right.
I continued to pay attention
Mhm.
and observe, what was going on.
Mhm.
But I know I wasn't politically active.
Okay.
I'd been through that.
Mm.
And I was very much into that in my prior incarnation. That's one of the reasons I was shot to death
Ah.
at the end of that incarnation.
So that wasn't this time. That wasn't your destiny this time around.
It wasn't my mission.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have really the temperament for it.
Mm.
I'm an introvert,
Mm.
believe it or not.
Mm.
I was much more introverted in the younger years than I am now.
Okay.
But most of the time I live by myself, I'm alone.
Mm.
Um, so I came up here because she decided to stay and she invited me to come up. That's how I ended up here in Anchorage, Alaska.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't able to do a lot of spiritual practice. She told me she was interested in meditation, but
Mhm.
it turned out she really wasn't. And she was more political activist. It
Okay.
was all good stuff. I mean, I agreed with it all.
Mhm.
After a couple of years, she actually was on the staff of one of the state representatives down in Juneau.
Mhm.
Um, it's a small state. I mean, it's easy to know everybody,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
get involved in that.
Right.
But I stayed in touch with John Dan Reeb,
Mhm.
and also I would say John Dan was one of my teachers,
Mm.
definitely, because he was really steeped in the Western tradition. And I
Well, what's
shared,
his name? What's his name?
it's Edward's father, John
My
Dan Reeb.
dad, John Dan Reeb, Transformations.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay. Yeah, I didn't catch that. Okay, interesting. That's the connection here, huh? Okay,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I met him when I was still in college.
okay.
When this friend of mine, Jim Gordon, was in John Dan's English class, and
Uh-huh.
he said, "You got to." I was living in Santa Ana, going to UC Irvine. He said, "You got to come up here and meet this dude." And he was so enthusiastic, I couldn't say no.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was blown away. I mean,
Uh,
talk about an intense person.
really, really. So he was in more steeped in the Western esoteric tradition?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
totally. He was
Okay.
he was into the Western Kabbalah.
Nice.
Kess got him more Eastern oriented so that by the time I was born, he was completely focused on a more Tibetan Vajrayana path. So that was Kess's influence on my life indirectly through my dad.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting. Interesting.
Edward's dad, really got me interested in the Western tradition more in the Tree of Life. I'd always been interested in the idea of the ancient mystery schools,
Sure. Mhm.
and I already knew that they had used psychedelics in those, in the Eleusinian mysteries. And
Mhm.
there's a book called The Road to Eleusis, which documents that.
Right.
It's a very good book. Maybe you've seen it.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I wanted to know more about it. But like Lama Govinda had said, the the Western mysteries were pretty much stamped out by the Romans when Christianity became their state religion.
Right.
But the tradition is still going on the inner planes,
Mhm.
and there have always been people that have worked with the inner school,
Mhm. Mhm.
like Paul Foster Case with the BOTA,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
which it has its headquarters not too far from where I grew up in Eagle Rock.
Hmm. It's a Bay Area, yeah, that's right.
But anyway, John Dan was a very good
More
influence.
Los Angeles, West Los Angeles, East Los Angeles.
Mm.
East. Well, the BOTA is in North Los Angeles.
Oh, it's in LA.
Northeast. Yeah, it was down the street from my ancestral home in in the 90042.
Exactly.
I was
Exactly.
thinking, what's the one in the Bay Area? It's like the Rosicrucian Temple. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh
Like,
yeah, in
San Jose.
Amorc,
it's San
in
Jose.
San Jose.
Amor. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Okay.
I visited there almost about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a neat place to visit.
Mm.
That reminded me of something. I recently got this series of talks from a teaching company called The Real History of the Mystery Schools.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 26 half-hour lectures.
Oh, wow.
It's by a history teacher at Idaho State University.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about that Rosicrucian school
Mm-hmm.
in San Jose. He talks about Aleister Crowley a lot. In fact, this guy's written a book on Crowley.
Oh, wow.
It's quite a series. You would probably find it of some interest, both of you.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
But he talks mostly about how the esoteric has influenced historical events in politics and
Oh,
war and
interesting.
power struggles and all these Masonic organizations
Mm-hmm.
that people were members of in different countries. It's fascinating. Doesn't give any practices or anything like that. But he doesn't mention the BOTA either, or Paul Foster Case, but I enjoyed it. Then he's got another one on the ancient mystery cults.
Did you ever get involved in any organizations like, the BOTA or the OTO or anything like that?
No,
No? Okay.
but I have made contact with interplane sources of that tradition.
Okay. So direct experience. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good, good, good.
I mean, going back to Socrates, Pythagoras,
Mm-hmm.
and the Greek mystery schools. Socrates was an illusion initiate. So was Plato.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I learned from these lectures.
Mm-hmm.
So was Plutarch, and so was Cicero, the Roman
Okay.
senator.
Yeah.
They were all initiated into the psychedelic
Yeah.
tradition of the Eleusinian mysteries.
Right. And they're taking basically like an ergot fungus which is the same as LSD, basically. It's a derivative
That's right.
yeah, right. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's interesting.
And
There's been more research. There's another book that came out recently. I forgot the name of it. I'll have to pull it up, but it's a lot of research done on what they were taking and what was happening in the Eleusinian mysteries. So very interesting stuff.
There was a proto surrealist movement. I think it was in the Netherlands when everybody was getting ergot in their bread, and so all the painters just sort of intuitively started surrealism like 100 years or so before surrealism.
wow.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I'm trying to find the name of the book.
I found the book that Kess dedicated to my dad, and also was it dedicated to Jim?
Yeah, I mentioned
Jim
Jim
and my
Gordon
dad.
too.
Centering prayer and rebirth in Christ on the tree of life.
Oh, wow. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. So this is Kess's book.
Wow.
And then the creation of reality. Kess isn't going to plug his own book, so I'm plugging him. The creation of reality, which was channeled, right, Kess?
Well, it was inspired. I wouldn't say it was actually channeled, but
oh, okay.
What's the other one? That you had another one. I can't see.
The Will of Divine Love.
The Will of Divine Love. Okay, so it says, what's it say on the bottom on the
centering prayer and spiritual psychology.
Oh, okay.
So this gets more into Thomas Keating territory.
Okay, interesting, interesting.
Yeah, that's a little later in my story than where we've got.
Oh, okay. I don't want to skip ahead.
No, I appreciate your input, Edward.
Yeah. The one who loves us. So you can kind of see while the institution of Vatican I may have been repulsive at that young age, that it wasn't a rejection of Christ necessarily, or of Western things. And then through the integration with the Hermetic Qabalah and the Vajrayana Buddhism, I mean, I think you and I and many other people in the world, although with me it's because of Kess actually, but a lot of people kind of find it on their own, sort of not a blending necessarily, but like a I like to use the word triangulation, like one eye in Hermetic Qabalah and the other eye in Vajrayana Buddhism, and then you can kind of the three-dimensional picture starts to emerge. Where if you're completely in one or the other, then it tends to be kind of flat, and you can only really relate in terms of that egregore.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Standing outside, then you can start to see the truth in Hinduism and Islam as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that's a very important thing, the idea of universal spirituality, and the fact that we can approach the mystery through these different pathways, and they all take us to the same place. So by studying the different pathways, we learn more about the place because we are approaching it from different particular angles.
Yeah, it's like you're exploring different paths to the heart, basically. It's like these different entry ways and different,
In the Christian contemplative tradition, they have what they call the apophatic and the cataphatic. Those are Greek words. Cataphatic means with images. Apophatic means without images. So everything that you can perceive with your senses or conceive of in your mind, every image, that's all cataphatic. But the actual mystery is apophatic.
Interesting. Okay. I haven't heard those terms before. New terms.
Kind of like these the heads on Padmasambhava's staff here, the realm of form and the realm of formlessness being the skull and then the realm of desire underneath that. So he was master of all three.
Right. They say. It's interesting seeing all the crossover. So after I guess we can kind of go like to backtrack, so to speak, right? We kind of left off with you with your Swamiji teacher, and then you moved on from there. You went to Naropa Institute for a while, and then after that, you ended up.
I knew people that were full-time students there. That I worked with, friends, and I went there a few times. I went and sat. They had a place where you could go and meditate, and I used to go and sit there. And I came up here to Alaska.
Well, what year did you go to Alaska?
I came up here in 1983.
Okay.
And it was here that I started writing that book, The Creation of Reality, that Edward held up.
Nice.
So that was published about 10 years after the Satsang Notes of Swami Amar Jyoti. And I was living, with that woman when I wrote it. And it was a good place to be. The source of inspiration was working with me, and that was a big practice anyway. And then, in 86, 87, I met this other person who was a co-worker with a woman who I became involved with, who had grown up in Aspen, Colorado.
Mm.
And she was a Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as we became friends, I told her about my grudge for the Catholic Church, and
Uh-huh.
she explained that it had changed a lot since, my days.
Uh-huh.
And she told me about this monastery in Snowmass called St. Benedict's that
Mm-hmm.
she went to.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her about my interest in meditation and Carl Jung. She asked me if I've ever heard of centering prayer, and I said no.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main teachers of that was Thomas Keating.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote this book called Open Mind, Open Heart, which is an introduction. It's a great spiritual classic to centering prayer.
Mm-hmm.
She got me a copy of it. And the book really blew me away
Mm-hmm.
because it presented, a method of prayer or meditation that was the equal of anything I'd learned from Swamiji or anybody else.
Oh, wow. And was it simple or was it a complicated
It's
practice?
very simple.
Very simple.
It's very simple. It's apophatic. Takes you into the apophatic,
Mm-hmm.
letting go of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
resting in the present moment,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and consenting. The key to it is inwardly consenting to the presence and action of the divine within you.
Mm, okay.
So when you do that, you're giving the spirit in you permission
Mm-hmm.
to transform you,
Mm-hmm.
to heal you, to work on you.
Mm, okay.
So it inaugurates a transformation process,
Mm,
which takes for most of it quite a long time, a
mm-hmm.
lot of patience, and a lot of persistence and dedication.
Mm, okay.
So I hadn't been on a retreat for a while, and this gal, her name was Marty, told me that she knew the guest master at St. Dominic's,
Mm-hmm.
and that they would let people do private retreats there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, I don't want anybody trying to convert me back into the church. And she said, no, they won't bother you there.
Okay.
They'll just let you do your thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I made contact with them and scheduled myself for a 3-week private retreat.
Mm-hmm.
And the monks invited me to join them for lunch, which was real nice because they ate in silence while somebody did spiritual reading. And it was the best vegetarian food I'd ever had. Certainly the equal of what they had at the ashram,
Mm.
which was also excellent. And plus, I had my own food, in my own place, which I had bought. But it turned out that this guest master, he was an admirer of Lama Govinda's work,
Oh, wow. That's interesting. What a
and
coincidental.
he had been sent by the Vatican to France to study under Thich Nhat Hanh
Oh,
at
wow.
Plum Village for a few years
Mhm.
because he said the Vatican wanted to know what's going on there.
Mm.
And he loved the Zen meditation, and so we had a real good rapport.
Mm.
And I also walked up, I was about a mile from the monastery building.
Mhm.
I walked up 2 or 3 times a day to go to what they call Vespers
Mhm.
and Mass. And, no, Vespers is in the evening. Logs is the thing in the morning. I didn't go up for that too much. But I would go up for the Mass and go up for lunch and go up for Vespers. And I was really moved by the power of the ritual that they did. And so I kind of experienced a feeling of reconciliation
Mhm.
with the church just through experiencing the sacredness of this place. And the second or third day I was there, when I was meditating, I was sitting cross-legged on some cushions on a bed in the barn rooms where I was staying. Something came in through the top of my head and pulled me out of my body There was this powerful presence there, and I felt it energizing me, and I didn't see anything, but or hear anything, but I was being asked to share centering prayer with people in Alaska.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
It was an incredible experience. Came back down out of that, and I was amazed by it. I felt very energized and enriched. Then I thought to myself, I'd have to go back into the Catholic Church to do that. Well, for my ego was kind of resisting this.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next day, when I was meditating, the same experience came over me again. And then I said to myself, I think I better pay attention to this. So I asked Theophan, he was the guest master, I told him a little bit about what I had experienced. Thomas Keating was there at the time of the monastery, so he did do a lot of traveling and teaching. I asked him if he would ask Thomas Keating if he'd meet with me. And so he came back and said he'll meet with you after lunch in the reconciliation room.
Mm.
So I met with Keating, Thomas Keating,
Mm.
for 2 days in the reconciliation room for 2 hours each, going through my whole spiritual journey. And after I told him what I'd done, who I'd met, what I was doing, he said, "Well, I don't think you really need this. You could just, keep on doing what you're doing. You should be fine."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, the reason I'm asking you is because of the idea of sharing centering prayer, doing something to help other people. Because I've received a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's in the Bodhisattva spirit. I want to give back."
Mm.
And he said, "Okay, well," he said, "I want you to come next June to a 10-day centering prayer retreat I'll be leading down in Amarillo, Texas, so you can see how we present this thing." And he said, "Expect to experience failure when you first start. That's usually part of the training."
Mm.
And I really, really connected with him.
Okay.
I could feel his compassion, that he was a very advanced soul, but also very personable, very humble. And, he shared the stage with the Dalai Lama. He's a world famous dude.
Yeah, I've heard of him before. Yes, for sure. Yeah.
And he was really the real thing. And so I started a very good student-teacher relationship with him.
Mm-hmm.
And he honored all the other stuff I was doing. He was a big promoter of interreligious dialogue.
Okay.
In fact, they had this thing at his monastery called the Snowmass Conference every year, which was closed to the public. He invited leaders from all the world religions to come together and dialogue with each other off the record.
Nice.
So none of it was recorded.
That's excellent.
He'd already been doing that for several years when I met him.
That's great.
And he also taught at Naropa.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Trungpa invited him. They had a thing on Christian contemplation and Tibetan Buddhist meditation. It went on for several days. And Keating was one of the main Christian representatives there. But, he's totally different than a guru from the East.
Yeah.
Very much here is equal,
Okay. Yeah. So you didn't feel the sort of hierarchical
No, not with him.
presentation or vibe that you got from your Swamiji, right?
Well, I felt that with priests and other Christians, but not with Keating.
Uh-huh. Mm. So you feel more or less on equal footing with him rather than him up on a pedestal, so to speak. Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was a priest I had met
Mm-hmm.
up here
Mm-hmm.
named Father Dan, who was a real good man. And I've gotten to know him through that gal I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, he invited me to dinner one evening, and he told me that he was starting to burn out as a priest.
Uh-huh.
He was overworked.
Okay.
He was the only priest at this parish
Mm-hmm.
that had a very large number of people.
Mm.
He was just having to do too much. And
Mm.
he said, I'd like to know more about this centering prayer because I think it might help me.
Mm.
And that's part of the whole idea of it is you go back to the well to get filled up doing the silent prayer, and then you take that energy and you use it in your ministry
Mm-hmm.
of service to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Swamiji used to say the reason a lot of social reformers got burned out was because they didn't have any meditation practice.
Mm.
And they
Exactly.
were too attached to the results of their efforts.
Right. Right.
So if you're doing karma yoga right, you leave the results to God, and you're doing this to serve them, but you're doing it for God,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not attached. If the results are no good, that's God's thing. If the results are good, then thank God. You don't take credit for it.
Right. 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 That makes
So
sense.
the ego doesn't get involved. Either way.
Mm. So it's from this stage that really the centering prayer became your main practice, your main daily practice, perhaps.
Oh yeah, it became a main practice. I've continued with the puja though. It's a cataphatic practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to mass.
Mm-hmm.
Right now I have disability with walking and balance.
Okay.
So I don't go anywhere
Okay.
except to appointments.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can't go to those things, but I don't know, I got enough I can just do right here.
Yeah. Right. You're able to write there.
Modern
You do your
technology.
practice there. You can talk with us there. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been able to meet with people on Zoom, and
Uh-huh.
we've done a lot of teaching on Zoom
Oh, nice.
during the COVID.
Do you lead like centering prayer practices on Zoom with other people or groups?
Well, I've got people that I've taught who are doing that.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I can do it if I'm needed to, but
Sure.
I'd rather have other people doing it, getting younger people involved to
Mm-hmm.
keep the thing going.
Okay.
And but so yeah, like there's an international thing I'm going to participate on the 27th
Mm-hmm.
on Zoom. It's
Mm-hmm.
got people from all over the world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and we do a bilingual or trilingual retreat once a month with
Mm-hmm.
people from the tip of South America all the way up here to Alaska.
Oh, nice.
It's
Okay.
in centering prayer. I have
Mm-hmm.
a very good friend who used to travel with Thomas Keating and
Mm-hmm.
translate for him when he was in Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
who has organized this, and I'm helping her with it.
Okay. Nice. Nice. So was it the centering prayer? Was it the simplicity and the effectiveness that immediately sort of drew you into it?
Well, the thing that really drew me into it
Mm-hmm.
had to do with my background in psychology.
Okay.
Thomas Keating made a series of, and I think you can see these for free on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
He made a series of talks called the Spiritual Journey series,
Mm-hmm.
in which he presents the Christian spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
And what he has done is he has integrated modern developmental and depth psychology with traditional monastic Christian spirituality.
Okay.
And I really liked the way he presented it, and I just knew that this was important.
Okay.
So when at that 10-day retreat that he invited me to, they showed those. Plus, he gave talks and private interviews. I decided I was going to buy that set of videos, and I invited the priest that was on the verge of burnout to come. And they let us talk at the evening meal. And I told him I'm going to buy these, and he said I'll give you a place to show them. And that's what started. That was like in 1990 when I started doing 91 in January when I started doing the centering prayer groups.
Okay, nice.
And so that's continued ever since then, and it's spread.
Okay, great. So from there, it sounds like you also wrote a series of books as well. Was that inspired by this practice, or was that related to something else?
Yeah, no, it's related to both really, but I've written and published 5 centering prayer related books having to do with developing further the conceptual background. Like Thomas Keating said, he wanted people that had studied his teachings to build on them and take it further.
Okay.
And I took that to heart. So the first book was called Human Ground, Spiritual Ground, a reflection on centering prayer's conceptual background. That was published in 2012. And in 2013 came that book that Edward held up called, Centering Prayer and Rebirth in Christ on the Tree of Life. So what I'm trying to do is to incorporate the Kabbalistic Tree of Life into a whole new audience of Christian people.
That's cool.
By showing them how it fits. How the center of the tree, Tippereth, beauty, is the indwelling Christ.
Like the Christ consciousness.
We talk about in Christian mysticism. Or it's the indwelling Buddha nature,
Sure,
you're talking to a Buddhist.
Yeah.
So the hope is to bring that tradition into this tradition. In many ways, I think centering prayer is outgrowing the church. But there's a lot of people in the church that are not ready to let go of the church.
Sure.
So I'm kind of pushing the envelope,
Yeah. Well, I mean, technically, this practice, one doesn't need to ascribe to dogma, do they? Do they need to ascribe to, for example, a Christian view or,
No, you don't need to.
Yeah.
It was made for Christians because Christians didn't have anything like it available to them. And also a thing that I reflected to myself was that if you want to be of service, then you go to where the need is. And God knows if there's any place there's a need, it's in the Christian churches.
Okay, that's a
not
fair
just
point.
the Catholic Church, but all of them.
All of them, yeah, for sure.
So in this context, becoming a Lama would have been selfish.
That's right.
It's bringing the mysticism back into the Christian tradition, so to speak, right?
Well, if you're gonna teach people in a tradition, you got to teach them in the language of their tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alan Watts tried that in the 40s and then gave up and went completely Eastern. But I think he started out trying that where you came around to it after a long journey.
Right. Yeah, he was a great bridge. I have a recording. It's on a cassette tape. It's his talk given in English by Lama Govinda. And it was given after Alan Watts passed away. And it's called the Alan Watts Memorial Lecture.
Oh, wow.
Lama Govinda talks about his experience with Alan Watts on that houseboat. Because Alan Watts was a key person that welcomed Lama Govinda and his wife, who was from India, to the United States.
Oh,
So
very
it was a really nice connection there.
mm, interesting. Interesting. All these people you got to spend time with become these sort of like legendary figures, right? Like for a lot of like people in my generation, they hear names like Ram Dass or Chogyam Trungpa, and it's almost like they're these legendary
Oh,
figures.
yeah, they are.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, another thing, when I told my uncle about my first LSD experience,
Hmm.
he shared with me that he recently had had an LSD experience with Laura Huxley,
Oh, wow.
Aldous Huxley's widow.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
She was
Nice.
a therapist. She was a therapist in LA, and
Mm,
he knew her.
wow.
wow.
That's insane.
And
Yeah.
In
his
an interview
experience,
with, sorry,
I was just going to say, my
yeah.
Uncle Andy's experience was one of communing with nature. It wasn't of the deep interior
Hmm.
spiritual thing that I had.
Hmm.
Mm.
Did you meet a lot of the psychedelic pioneers? Like you spent time with Ram Dass or Timothy Leary or anyone like that as well?
I met Timothy Leary, but I didn't get involved with him.
Sure, sure, sure. But maybe
I
at an
heard him
event or
speak,
something.
and
Yeah.
I heard him give some really good talks in person a couple of times.
Hmm.
And when I started going to UC Irvine, I had a mentor who was interested in meditation, which at that time was extraordinary for somebody in a university psychology department.
Hmm.
It's like meditation wasn't even considered an acceptable area of inquiry in academic psychology at that time.
Wow. Okay.
And I shared with him that I had experimented with LSD. And he gave me a copy of a reel to reel tape, which was Timothy Leary's farewell talk at Harvard University.
Nice. That's awesome.
Mm.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I wish I still had a copy of that talk. Yeah, I think he was probably high when he gave it. There was just tremendous, there was a tremendous amount of really high teaching on that in that talk and commentary about our whole society and the whole world situation. I gave the reel to reel copy to a guy in San Francisco who had a radio program called New Dimensions. His name was Will Nofke.
Mhm.
So he could play it for people and make it available to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Timothy Leary is definitely a fiery kind of guy and very interesting. Some people say that he was sort of a what would you say? I mean, of course, people view him as a pioneer, and he was the voice of a time. But on the other hand, as you mentioned earlier, with all the research that was being done with psychedelics, some people had a lot of like spite for him because they felt like he kind of let the cat out of the bag, and
Yes, that's
instead of
true.
making it this like, oh, everybody turn on, tune in, drop out, he sort of led to the downfall, led to the illegalization, I guess you would say,
Mm.
Yeah,
and the
well,
demonization of psychedelics, whereas they had a
in
lot of
fact,
potential.
President, when Nixon was president,
Yeah.
he thought Timothy Leary was the most dangerous man in the country.
Right, right, right. And then I think wasn't it Aldous Huxley too, who of course wrote
Aldous Huxley,
Perception.
Aldous Huxley told him, "Don't let the sexual cat out of the bag."
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was his view that like he basically said that like this should be for the upper class elite, sort of like
Said for the best and the brightest.
the best and
Oh,
the yeah. He sort of had yeah, exactly. He had almost like an elitist view, and Leary was like, no,
yeah.
everybody must. They had both basically extreme ends on both sides, right? Like,
Well, Huxley had a good point, but
yeah.
I think he meant, at least in the initial stages,
Hmm.
let's keep it secret and reserve it for the best and the brightest.
Mm.
And then once we've learned more about it, then we'll develop a strategy for approaching the general
General public.
population.
Sure,
Mm.
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Larry let the cat out of the bag, and
Mhm.
he advocated indiscriminate usage.
Right. I got this here. Check it out. Timothy Leary,
That's him.
Exopsychology, signed by Timothy Leary.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I got this on from his son, actually. So
Yeah,
yeah.
you know his
Wow.
son.
I
How's
don't
his
know
son
his son.
doing?
I don't know him personally, but I bought it off of like right after he died. Yeah, he sold a
After
bunch of
Larry
his
died?
signed books. Yeah.
Mm.
I saw Larry speak in person in Santa Monica
Mm-hmm.
in a small venue in the 90s,
Oh wow.
a couple of years before he died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Interesting.
Well, something I will share with you about him that John Aiken told me, that he was the founder of the Church of the Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
John Aiken had friends on the faculty at Harvard
Mm-hmm.
that knew Larry
Mm-hmm.
when Larry was there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, who was a psychiatrist, I'm not sure if his name was Walter Pankey or if he was somebody else. Walter Pankey was a very important person in the early psychedelic movement.
Mm-hmm.
He told John Aiken that Timothy Leary had developed a messiah complex.
Mm. Yeah, certainly makes sense. You know, you have all these people following you, and
He didn't initially have that complex,
right,
but
right,
he developed it.
right.
And so he became messianic after he was out of Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very charismatic speaker, very gifted. The young people flocked to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like he said, don't trust anybody that's under 30.
Over 30. Yeah.
Or over 30, yeah.
That's funny.
Because at the time he was in his 40s.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. It's interesting how both him and Ram Dass, well, who was original name what Alpert, Richard Alpert, is that right?
Richard Alpert was his name, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how they went opposite directions in some respects, right?
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Alpert went to India and
Met
he
his
ended
guru.
up meeting he ended up meeting Maharaji,
Right.
who became his great guru.
Mm-hmm.
And then became a spiritual practitioner, and
Mm-hmm.
he sort of came back posing as a Hindu holy man when he came back to the United States.
Right.
The way he dressed, the way he talked, and all that.
Right.
But Maharaji was working through him. I
Yeah.
saw him when he first came back in San Francisco at the Unitarian
Mm-hmm.
church. It's a big church, and they were giving out copies of not only the book Be Here Now, but this is called a Cookbook for Inner Space,
Oh,
which
interesting.
had the book in it. It had a long play, 33 to 3rd RPM talk by him telling the whole story of his journey to India
Mm.
and other things.
Interesting. Yeah,
He was a great.
my grandma said in the late 60's, Be Here Now was like a Bible that you would just see at all the hippies' houses. It was so spread out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah, I grew up with it around.
yeah, I have a copy of it here somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Somewhere here, yeah.
I have a copy at the house down in Los Angeles. Yeah, that was a great book.
Mm-hmm.
Great book.
Yeah.
Classic. It's a classic, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Okay. So that brings us, I guess, we kind of went through your like LSD phase into studying, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Vajrayana, to time with Trungpa, all the way to Swamiji, and then all the way to the contemplative prayer, centering prayer. Is that right?
Yeah, centering prayer.
Uh-huh.
Centering prayer is a method to access the gift of contemplation. So the contemplation is not something we do, it's something that God does in us with our consent.
Okay. So how would you distinguish then something like mystical contemplation and meditation? Are they different, or are they two sides of the like heads?
I think that it all takes you to the same place.
Okay. Okay.
So, I mean, basically, we are receivers of this prayer, of this meditation, this consciousness. So it involves letting go of the ego, first a purification process and then a letting go process, and then becoming more and more one with the divine consciousness, which is a non-dual consciousness that simultaneously is individual and universal. The first really good explanations I heard of it, well, Swamiji had a good one, but the best one I think was Lama Govinda. He said there's like a saying, which is kind of a cliche from one of the earlier teachings of the Buddhists translated into English, saying the dewdrop slips into the shining sea.
Yeah.
As a metaphor. And Lama Govinda refers to that as a crude simile. He said it would make much more sense if we said that the sea slips into the shining dewdrop.
Okay, I like that. That's the inverse, yeah. I like that.
It makes no sense from three-dimensional.
It doesn't imply the dewdrop into the sea can give someone kind of a frightening sense of losing their self. I mean, not the ego doesn't like the idea of losing their self, but to bring the ocean into the drop is much more empowering sounding for the ego.
Yeah,
we're losing,
that's
drop into the ocean. It's like splat on a windshield or something.
Lama Govinda taught, he said this on Alan Watts' houseboat, that with the Vajrayana practices, you draw the universe into yourself.
Right. So it's sort of like some Buddhist emphasis on emptiness, right? Versus when you look at things like Dzogchen, where it's open luminosity, clarity, fullness, right? Versus they're two different perspectives, but they're talking, about the non-dual.
Well, the emptiness is the first phase.
Right. Preparing the vessel.
Out of which creation comes. A manifestation of phenomenal reality. So people's mysticism simply is to try to get back to the emptiness and nothing more. They're not making the journey. It's like regressing back to where you came from without going on the full journey of what's there to travel through.
Right. That makes sense, yeah. I like that metaphor, though, that you said. What was it? It was the ocean into the dewdrop? Is that what he said?
Yeah, Lama Govinda said a more accurate description of the enlightenment experience is that the ocean slips into the shining dewdrop.
Okay, I like that. That's good. That's a good one. Very nice. Okay.
So, like individual points of consciousness containing the universal.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. Did you ever get into any like debates as you moved through these traditions and you went through the Eastern path and and then also spending time with the Catholic Church? Did you ever get into? Did they ever want to debate like deeper, theological positions or things like this?
I haven't really had anybody with a serious debate. A lot of people just believe in certain dogmas. They turn those dogmas into absolutes.
Right.
And when you're talking to somebody like that, the most compassionate thing to do is simply accept them as they are and offer them whatever you can that might be of service to them. But if somebody wants to really listen to me, I would say we should all start out by taking a tip from Socrates. When the Delphic oracle was asked, who is the wisest of people? The oracle responded, it is Socrates. And when Socrates was told that, he was very surprised because Socrates had come to the true understanding that he did not know.
Mm.
That we
Therefore,
cannot
he was
know.
the wisest.
Pardon?
I said, therefore, he was the wisest because everybody else was under the
Thought that they
delusion
knew.
that they understood everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not possible to truly know anything with the intellect alone,
Sure.
because the mind cannot think without first entertaining some assumption
Right.
on which to create.
Yeah.
And the assumption is
Yeah.
simply accepted as a matter of trust or faith.
Mhm.
It's an assumption.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
cannot prove it
Right. I agree.
because you fall back to still needing assumption to say anything. So there's no way of clearing everything off
Mhm.
and proving something.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
That's simply the way the intellect works.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, what's your view on in terms of, I think reading books and studying is very important, but I see a lot of people who they spend almost no time doing a practice and having direct experience, direct gnosis, direct, like you would, contemplation, where it becomes this, collecting different teachings and collecting different,
Yes. Well, Trungpa advised
debate.
against that.
Right.
Trungpa, he advised against that. He said, when you study, there comes a point where you don't need to study anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You need to put it into practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people who try to remain perpetual students
Mm.
to the exclusion of being practitioners, they're avoiding the real issue.
Right. It's the comfort zone of staying in mental,
It's a comfort zone and it's an escape from
intellectual. Yeah.
facing
Mm-hmm.
from facing your existential aloneness and incompleteness.
Yeah.
Or, for the ego facing its insufficiency.
Yeah.
So it becomes counterproductive.
Mm.
And of course, engaging in debate can be an excuse for continuing to do that because you're going to find the perfect argument to convince everybody with.
Right. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely. So your current projects, you said you're working on a memoir. Is that correct? Sort of a.
Yeah, I just completed the first part of it.
Okay.
Prior to that, I wrote a book called Oneness and Contemplation,
Mhm.
Centering Prayer and Universal Spirituality,
Okay.
where I address a lot of the stuff we've just been talking about.
Okay.
I don't have a publisher for that book yet.
Okay.
The man who was doing my publishing died in January of 2021.
Okay.
I'm trying to find another publisher.
Okay. You also do something like self-publication or releasing it on Amazon, Kindle,
Yes,
Audible. That's always another option for sure too. Yeah.
yeah, those are definite options that I've got in the back of my mind, if nothing else.
I think the memoir would be interesting on Audible, an audiobook, because it would be you telling your story, and people like to hear, in your voice. That would be kind of neat too.
Yeah, I would enjoy doing that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people really, I enjoy that too. I mean, I listen to audiobooks sometimes, and it's always way better when it's in that person's voice because it's so much more authentic and it's, they're taking you on the journey versus some, random, I don't know, guy who reads as his part-time job.
James Earl Jones or something.
Yeah, AI in a mechanical robot voice. Then
Oh
I
yeah,
met Swami
that's
Ji,
awful. That's the
and it was
worst.
very great.
The other thing is I might go off on sidetracks if I'm reading and add to what's already there. I would
It's
have to be
actually
very disciplined.
I actually recently listened to an audiobook and it was cool because he reads the whole, it's sort of like a memoir, right? And what he does, which is a really interesting thing, I've never seen this in any other audiobook. So he'll go, chapter one, this phase of my life. And then, so he's reading off the actual script, right? The book. And then at the end of the chapter, he'll comment on like different angles, different thoughts he had while he was reading it, different things he didn't include. So it's kind of like an extra bonus segment
Yeah, I think I would want to do that
Yeah,
if I did an audio book.
that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's just the thought, food for thought, you know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So you're working on your memoir, and you said you have other like students. Yours also are leading the centering prayer. Um, do you have any other like, say, people wanted to reach out to you? Do you have a website or any way that people can
I
reach
don't
out?
have a website, but
No. Mhm.
uh, well, depends on where they live. You know how they would reach out.
Hmm. Okay.
They could they could send me an email,
Mhm.
but they would have to identify, like put Edward Reib's name on it or
Mhm.
something like that. You know.
Mhm.
So I know I probably wouldn't even look at it. I
Okay.
get all kinds of emails that I don't want. I'm very jealous of my time.
Mhm.
It's so I don't answer the phone until somebody starts leaving a message, or if I have the phone and I can see it's somebody I know calling, then I'll answer.
Yeah, a lot of
Otherwise,
spam and junk. Yeah.
there's all this crap. I don't want to waste my time with it. And I figure if it's a friend calling, they will leave a voicemail.
Okay. Fair point. That's good. All right. It's interesting though, the connection between you and Edward's dad. That's fascinating to me. Very, very interesting. Have you
Oh, real
guys?
quick, I wanted to plug. I recently put out a second edition of Transformations. You see that
Oh,
there?
Nice.
So it's got this. This was when I was hiking up near Annapurna Base Camp, and I actually took this photograph in the Himalayas,
Mm.
and so yeah, it's the back too, and it's much more streamlined. So yeah, John Dan Reib. If you go on your search engine or Amazon right now and type in my dad's name, JohnDanReib.
Mm.
That'll get you to Transformations. And I think it's like
yeah.
$5. I'm not interested in making a profit off this.
What's the
Uh,
content of it? What's the like the main
well,
subject?
gosh, that's a good question. It's not very long. I liken it to like a 1970s man writing a Tao Te Ching. It's not the
Huh.
same as Tao Te Ching, but he's directly reflecting, he's talking about his process without introducing himself first. Like
Mm.
he's talking to you as if you already know what he's talking about.
Mm.
And kind of like, I mean, the way it's written, it's like these other people, they think I'm saying this, but you and I know that I'm actually saying this. And it's very nicely written. He interchanges between Eastern and Western references, but it's not about Eastern and Western or Eastern or Western references. But he'll make reference to it being Kali Yuga clock and things like that. But yeah, I mean, he basically, Poke Runyon gave a really nice review where he described it as mostly out of body experience poetry and Aristotelian logic.
Interesting.
And
Wow.
so it talks about, he refers to a lot of people as flesh place fear junkies,
Mhm.
which would be like the people that compulsively reincarnate without stopping to reflect or to exit. And then the other class of people is journeyers.
Mm.
And so I mean, I didn't know he had written it until after he died. So I was 16 years old, and I got the only 3 copies of this book that were in existence. He didn't publish it,
Mm.
and I read it again and again, and it kind of became my personal compass, my spiritual compass. And then just last year or the year before, I decided to go ahead and publish it. So
Wow.
I
it's out
bet your
there now.
dad's happy you did, Edward.
Yeah, I hope so. Some of
It,
it's like a little bit dated, the references, like he'll talk about people talking about Mao and Nixon on the radio, and it's like, well, they're not really talking about Mao and Nixon on the radio as much anymore. You know? Or he talks about, there's this one great line that humility is most often pride or arrogance in drag. And it's like, That might push a nerve these days for one or two people, but I think it's still the allegory, the analogy is very apt. Like putting on airs of humility. Look how humble I am. Yeah. So, but it's good.
It's a real trip to read that. It's like a stream of consciousness thing that which activates all kinds of things in your psyche. Every time you read it, different things are going to pop up for you.
Yeah. So Transformations by John Dan Reeb. That's it. That's the end of the advertisement.
I'd love to check it out. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah. I think it's available there. It's available most places.
Okay. So is it an ebook form or only print?
Yeah, it's in both.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Yeah. Well, maybe any final thoughts, or maybe if Edward wanted to ask any questions to Kess as well, because I kind of.
Oh no, I mean I've interviewed Kess like 6 or 7 times.
Oh, okay.
I think we've gone over everything. I just mostly wanted to give Kess a platform in our like in the podcasting world other than Esoteric Nerd, because I think there's certain people who are regular listeners of Esoteric Nerd, but there's different people who listen to Praxis, and so I wanted to expand and to introduce the two of you, because I think that it's very rare to meet someone who's simultaneously strongly interested in Hermeticism and Vajrayana. There's like a handful of people that I know of, like maybe 6 or 7 people that I've met in my whole life that really fit that description. So I thought it would be a mitzvah to introduce you.
No doubt. It would be interesting maybe some other time. I don't know how long it would take, but maybe like going through a basic tutorial of like doing the centering prayer. That would be kind of cool. That'd be maybe something of value to people too.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
For sure.
Yeah. How long does it typically take for somebody to learn that, would you say?
Well, it's going to depend on what their prior experience is.
Mm-hmm. And how deeply you dive into it.
Right. For sure.
And if they're comfortable with being still, being silent.
Given a familiarity with the Tree of Life. I mean, this book, Centering Prayer and Rebirth on the Tree of Life, it's a very specific take on. I don't think Thomas Keating himself had this take, but with your background in understanding Paul Foster Case and Dion Fortune's perspective on kind of the Golden Dawn Hermetic Qabalah and the Tree of Life, helps to kind of like explain what's happening with, this is the level where this kind of consciousness happens, and these are the imbalances. There's a great phrase that you use often, negative programmings that don't work, or something like that.
The false self programs for happiness.
Yeah.
That's a term Thomas Keating came up with.
Yeah.
He said you have these false self emotional programs for happiness that cannot possibly work.
Yeah.
I like that.
And the person's life is run by that, thinking that that's how they're going to find fulfillment, happiness in life.
And you can kind of, metaphorically, see that in terms of the imbalanced forces, the Klipothic, aspect of the planetary or sephirotic.
In that book, I used the lower triad, the personality astral triad, as where the false self is lodged within the soul. And another thing, the prayer, centering prayer in the apophatic is a way into the invisible sphere that's called Doth. And I call it Doth, the cloud, because the classical book of Christian contemplation that centering prayer is based on is called The Cloud of Unknowing. It was written by an anonymous 14th century mystic.
Okay.
Interesting. In modern times, the cloud has an interesting connotation too. except it's the cloud of all accumulated knowledge.
All cloud of all data. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is the antithesis. The antithesis of that.
Opposite clouds.
Oh, that's pretty
Dark
good.
side cloud.
That's good. That's good. All right. Well, I think we had it's over 2 hours now. This is a pretty good long chunk for people to listen to. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I can include, if it's okay, I'll include your email in the show notes if people are seriously interested in, maybe finding out more about your teachings, your books, and also if people want to learn also the prayer, centering prayer as well.
Yeah,
Perhaps.
the books are on Amazon.
Okay. I can include some links to the books as well in the show notes.
All the centering prayer books are available as ebooks.
Okay.
The earlier two are just hard copy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a limited supply of them, but they're there.
Okay.
Yeah, just have them say Edward Reib or something in the email in terms of the subject,
Okay.
so that I'll identify it.
Okay, that sounds good. So they're not spam bots,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. All right, any final words to Edward?
Nothing I can think of. I'm glad that we had the chance to have this conversation and,
for sure.
Record it for posterity and get it out there. And, thank you very much for setting this up.
Yeah, for sure. Also send me the link to Transformations because I want to post that in the notes too. That'd be great. Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, and until next time.
All right. Namaste.
Namaste. Until then.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Kess.
Good to see you, Edward.
Good night.